So we all know that the Leafs have had a little bit of trouble in the last week or so playing hockey and keeping their leads. I mean, they've dropped leads in the game against Colorado, the game against the Blues, and the game against Vegas. So they have had a little bit of trouble keeping their leads and playing that consistent structure that we've seen them play all season. That's been a huge topic of conversation. We know that. However, there has been something else that a lot of people have been talking about that I think is really important to touch upon, and it's regarding Keefe's mid-game decisions. So if we look at the game specifically, this is specifically where I noticed it. In the game against St. Louis this past Saturday, Riley got the penalty for throwing the puck over the glass with, I think there was like 6 seconds left or something like that. And there was a face-off in our zone. It was Kampf who took the face-off instead of Tavares. This it sparked a little bit of discussion. Now, it may seem small, like a small thing, like what's the point of talking about this because it was one face-off. But I feel like the actual impact that it has on the team is pretty big in a positive way. I think a lot of people were seeing it the opposite. They were seeing it in a negative light, which I don't really agree with, and here's why. So people were criticizing his choice here, saying that it should have been Tavares because with Tavares, it's more, we know his face-off percentage is like 61 point something. It's insane this season, the highest it's been, I'm pretty sure. So with Tavares, it is more of a sure thing that he's going to win the face-off, and with Kampf, it's less so of a certain thing. I don't know exactly what Kampf's face-off percentage is, but it's not as high as Tavares. Tavares has one, I think, the 5th highest in the league, something along those lines. So obviously, it's more of a sure thing with Tavares. Now, Kampf did end up winning the face-off. Thank God. That's great. Because of that, we were able to keep the Blues from getting any real chances before the final buzzer. But I do understand the concern that people had because it wasn't at all a sure thing that Kampf was winning that face-off, especially compared to who you could have had take the face-off instead. But this choice by Keefe is something that's different from last season, something that's different in terms of Keefe wouldn't have done this in prior seasons. And it's something that is going to help the team long-term into the playoffs. What do I mean by this? So last season, in my opinion, Keefe would have just thrown Tavares in there, which is what fans want to see. Of course, they want to see a win. They don't care about how the team gets there. No fan cares about how the team gets there. They just care that their team wins. So that's obviously what people wanted to see. 6 seconds left, 5 seconds left. Face off in our zone. You want Tavares there, obviously. Again, because it's more of a sure thing. And it's more reliable, especially in those dire situations, those crucial situations where you literally just have 6 seconds left. And on a team like, St. Louis, they had to get 1 goal with 6 seconds left to face off. It was a perfect situation for the Blues. Now, especially in those crucial situations, there's just a few seconds that you have to hang on, and you just need to get a face-off win. That face-off win, we know, can get you those few seconds to hold it in the corner and take the possession of it. We know what a face-off win can do in those situations. But this time, he chose Kampf, and decisions like this are so smart, effective, and important for a team like the Leafs. Last year in the playoffs, we know that our top lines, our star players, shut down, and our bottom lines could not generate anything. And if you've listened to my previous podcast episodes, especially from last season after the playoffs, we know that these bottom lines couldn't generate anything when the top lines shut down because it's not what they were told to do. It's not what they practiced to do. It's not what they knew. It's not what they knew to do in those situations because that's not what they were told their role was. I've talked about this before. Now, in those crucial situations, those bottom lines could not step up because simply they had not been put in those situations throughout the regular season. They had not been put in situations with 5 seconds left with the face-off in our zone. They had not been put in those situations. And I don't care about practice because practice does not properly replicate an in-game situation. If you put players, like you practice face-offs in practice, you put players in those hypothetical situations in practice means nothing. Putting players in those situations in actual games is what's going to get you the improvement and the effectiveness that you want. And that's what we were missing last season. From what I remember, could be wrong, but from what I remember, the bottom two lines, the bottom players were not put in those situations in games in the regular season. Now, seeing Keefe choose guys like Kampf and even Liljegren, I believe it was, in the same point in this game, he was put in this game too in the last few seconds, which shows improvement in coaching. And yes, of course, we want the sure win. Like I just finished saying, fans want the win. They don't care how we get there. They want the win every single game. But choosing those guys, like the Liljegrens and the Kampfs, in the crucial situations, instead of the Tavares, the Matthews, the Riley, the Brody, whatever, it does two things for the team. One, it shows those individual players that Keefe trusts them. Actually, I lied. It does three things. So for the players that he put on, so for the Kampfs and the Liljegrens, it shows them that Keefe trusts them. Which, whether you want to believe it or not, because I know there's a lot of people that don't really believe in the intangible things. So whether you want to believe it or not, it has a massive impact on the players mentally to know that their coach trusts them in those situations. And I know there's a player right now from the Stars, I can't remember his name, it's escaping me right now, but he wants to be traded because he doesn't feel like his coach trusts him. He doesn't feel like his coach wants him there. And now he's asking for a trade. The same thing can happen on any team. And Keefe putting these players on the ice in these crucial situations shows these players that they are trusted to do important things on this team. That they are valued and trusted by their coaching staff. It means a lot. Now, on the flip side, for the players that aren't put in those situations, like Tavares, for example, not being put in that specific situation in that game, Matthews or Riley or Brody, whatever players were not put on the ice in that situation, or for Tavares not being asked to take the face-off, but I believe he was still on the ice as like the second centerman that you're supposed to have in those situations. For those types of players, it shows them, it just releases the burden. It shows them that they are not the be-all and end-all of this team. Yeah, they're the core players. Obviously, they're the better players. That's not up for debate. But it shows that they are not going to be relied on 100% of the time, because that's what happened in the playoffs last year, and it totally destroyed them because they couldn't carry that burden. The Matthews, Marner, whatever, Tavares, they could not carry that burden for the whole team. So it shows those players that, yes, you are the best, and obviously we're going to rely on you the most. But if there comes a time when we can't rely on you, or it becomes too much for you, or you can't perform for whatever reason, like in the playoffs last season, we have other people that we trust. So it's not all on you. And again, mentally, for a player, that is huge. Because, I mean, we saw it, for me, it really shows with Marner the most, he had a hard time last season carrying that burden, and he's had a hard time in the past carrying these burdens that is put on these players. So showing them that it's not all about them and that they can rely on other players, that's a huge thing as well. Now, finally, for the team in general, the third thing that this does is it gets the depth and the practice that we've been missing in previous years. Keefe is building a team that is comfortable from the top line to the bottom line and taking part in those situations. They're not nervous. They're not feeling this huge burden. It's not like they're going in there with no practice. He's letting them get real game practice and letting them step into real life situations, not practice situations, hypothetical situations, real game situations. That is important, because come playoff time, if there are injuries, which we know from previous playoff years, that there have been injuries that have really screwed us, or even now more so likely with players on COVID protocol, if that happens in the playoffs. And also with like I've been talking about, with recent history of top players shutting down, it is so important to make sure you have multiple players throughout the entire lineup that are able to do what the top players can do. That's what teams like Tampa do. That's what teams like Colorado do. That's what teams like Vegas do, Florida. All the top teams, that's what they do. And like I said, ideally you want Tavares to be in those situations, but you have to prepare for the time when Tavares might not be able to take that face off, or when Tavares might not be playing well at all. You have to prepare for those times. Same goes for any other position on the roster, on the lineup. Keefe is trying to make sure that he has the versatility and that he has the depth that he needs going into the playoffs, and that's what was missing last season. So seeing something like this, it's so small to pick at, but it is so important that to notice that Keefe is playing this long-term game, and that needs to be acknowledged.